Hello everyone, welcome to our English session for this morning. So good to see lots and lots of you in this session today. So I'm so happy that you've come back for another English live tutorial. If you're new, welcome. Really good to see you in the My Tutor online school, and hopefully we can help with your learning this week. This session is going to be on the fictional use of language devices and features, which is quite a broad topic, as lots of you will know. And hopefully we have some exciting lesson content for you. It will actually be led by our tutor, Vicki, who led the English session that we had last week. So if you were there, then you've already met Vicki. But if you're joining for the first time, then not only is Vicki a tutor who has done over 250 lessons with us, but she's also actually a trained and qualified English teacher. So she's got lots and lots to contribute to the session today. Just a few things from me, which I always say at the beginning is our sessions are 1 hour long, 45 minutes for teaching, and typically 15 minutes at the end for questions. Questions can be sent through using the chat function or the Q&A function. And either myself or Vicki will pick them up as they come in. So if you have questions before the end, then do send them through as and when. And then also this session, like all the others, will be recorded, and you'll be able to access them afterwards. Cool, so that's everything from me. I'm going to hand over to Vicki now.
Hi, good morning everybody. Right, so today once again we are going to be looking at language devices and features. You just see my screen saver there, apologies. Right, so this is what we're going to be looking at for the remainder of the week, but each lesson effectively is going to be looking at different texts, so you get a range of ideas, and we're sort of going to build up on our knowledge, and sort of the questions I'm going to be asking you, giving you, will be building up on what we've been looking at together over the last few lessons. So I'm going to pretty much go over everything that I did on Wednesday, so if you're new you won't be missing out too much. I'm not going to go into depth in terms of what all the language devices and features mean like I did on Wednesday, because I've already done that, and if you're unsure please go back and look at that recording. That'll help you out a little bit more. So in terms of what paper 1 question 2 requires you to do, so you will always be asked how the writer uses language to describe. So on this occasion we're looking at the scenery. So the underlined part here is the thing that changes, the subject that changes with each extract. So we always get three same bullet points as I mentioned last time. So words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. The easier two and the more obvious two for you to be doing will be the words and phrases and language features and techniques, and throughout the week I'm going to be showing you how we can combine those two together to create a higher level answer, a more in-depth analysis. So in terms of general purposes of language features and techniques, or devices, whatever you like to call them, is to create a clear image in the reader's mind so we can actually understand what is written on the page, we can visualize it. So when it comes to actually examining them, you need to be specific. So if you just say, for example, this tells the reader that, and this therefore makes them want to read on, you won't get credit for it because it's far too general. You need to be specific as to why it is helpful, why it's useful, why it's there, what's the purpose of it. Otherwise you don't get credit for it, unfortunately. So this is the acrostic I spoke to you about last lesson. So this isn't, as I said last time, a finite list of absolutely everything you could think of in terms of language devices and techniques. So these are the ones that are actually on the list. So personification, pathetic fallacy, repetition, rhetorical question, oxymoron, use of senses, detailed description, sounds. So underneath that bracket comes alliteration, onomatopoeia and sibilance. Then we've got similes, symbolism, metaphors, imagery, length of sentences and edit. Now the edit is in red because we don't really need to worry about that. So this is your success criteria basically for paper 1. When it comes to your writing section, your creative writing, either writing a narrative or writing a description. For paper 1 question 2, this actually sort of helps you remember and retain all those different language devices and features you could be looking for. So it's effectively giving you a helping hand. Okay, right, have we got any questions so far? So in terms of really quickly going backwards, this question pretty much stays the same apart from the subject. So this time we're looking at the scenery. So we're going to be looking at an excerpt from Lord of the Flies. So I imagine some of you will be studying Lord of the Flies and are very familiar with it. Some of you won't be, but there might be a little bit of advantage for you for those who are. Right. So what I would like you to do, please, guys, so this is effectively a card sort, a matching activity. Obviously, because we're not in the same room together, I can't give you a card sort to be able to match them up together. So what I've done is I've given each of the examples on the right-hand column a letter. And what I would like you to do is I would like you to match their definitions up with the language devices on the left-hand side for me. So for example, pathetic fallacy and then E, for example. That's not the right answer, but that's the format that I'd like you guys to answer in. So send me some through the chat, see how well you do, please. I will give you 2 minutes. I'm not expecting you to do all of them, just 1 or 2. That would be lovely. And then I'll talk through each one of them just to keep your up your understanding of them and make sure that you know which each one of them means. If there's a clear one which people are getting consistently wrong, I will chat over them. So I'll just give you another minute and a half or so to have a go at those, and then we'll have a look at the chat function. It's nice to see lots of you flashing in at the moment, so I think I've got about 30 messages so far, so lovely, thank you very much. Just another minute or so. Yeah, so this is for AQA GCSE. This is what we're basing them these lessons off, just because AQA is the most popular one by a very long way in terms of English. However, in terms of what you need to know, knowledge, skill, these can be used across the board. You will all have similar questions in which you are expected to have this knowledge. So it is transferable. You don't need to worry about, oh, well, this is AQA, this means it's not going to be helpful for me. Right, okay. Let's have a look. So, alliteration, G. Right. So, alliteration isn't technically G. So, alliteration is, where is it? The repetition of the same sign. So, we're looking at J. So, you're not entirely wrong when you're saying G. So, G is sibilance. So, sibilance is a special type of alliteration, so it's the repetition of the s or sh sound. So all sibilance is alliteration, but not all alliteration is sibilance, if you get what I mean. So we've got alliteration as the umbrella, and then sibilance sort of as a separate bracket underneath. Use of senses for K, yep, absolutely, cracking stuff. Personification, F, lovely stuff. Metaphor, H, yep, brilliant. Pathetic fallacy, A, yep, where the weather reflects mood. Repetition, saying a word or idea more than once, C, yeah, fantastic. Oxymoron, I, putting two words together with opposite meaning, yeah, fantastic stuff. Imagery D, yeah, creating a clear picture. Rhetorical question B, yeah, a question which doesn't require an answer. Symbolism L, the use of symbols to represent ideas or qualities. Fantastic. Are there any that we haven't spoken about? I think, E, which is a simile. So using like or as to compare something. And I think we've covered all of those. Well done, guys. Cracking stuff. So the only one there was confusing alliteration with sibilance, but that's completely understandable. And if you said the s or the sh sound is a type of alliteration, if it's being repeated, you wouldn't be wrong. However, if you said sibilance, that's sort of extra marks because you're being more specific in the type of alliteration it is. But that's the only sounds that have a special name for them. Lovely stuff. Right, okie doke. So let's move on. So we're going to be looking at an extract from Lord of the Flies. I'm not sure whether I have it round near me. I don't think I do. Right, so out of curiosity, there are a lot of you who are doing Lord of the Flies. So shout to me if you are. So most of you aren't. So I imagine most of you, we were reading it, but school's closed, yeah. So most of you, I imagine, will be doing an inspector course from that particular module. However, it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this. You don't need to know the entire story to know what on earth is going on in this extract, and you won't be expected to know that in the exam. You will just be given a little short potted context. So this is what I've given you today. So the extract we're going to look at is taken from Lord of the Flies by William Golding, written in 1958. So it's, I suppose to you guys, quite an old text. The story follows a group of schoolboys whose plane has crashed on a deserted island. This is an absolutely fantastic book, really nice read. If you're not studying it, I think it's probably even nicer because I think we all think, oh, when we study a book, it's not as nice or as fun as it used to be. So just go off and read this. It's a really nice read. Right. So basically what we need to take from that is it's by a man called Golding, and it's about a group of schoolboys whose plane has crashed on a deserted island. Now, you will also be told where in the text this is taken from. So I haven't specifically told you that yet because I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to see if you can predict that for me, if you can tell me. So let's have a look at the extract. So you'll usually be given quite a chunky paragraph to look at. So this is what we are looking at. The shore was fledged with palm trees. These stood or leaned or reclined against the light, and their green feathers were 100 feet up in the air. The ground beneath them was a bank covered with coarse grass, torn everywhere by the upheavals of fallen trees, scattered with decaying coconuts and palm saplings. Behind this was the darkness of the forest proper and the open space of the scar. Ralph stood, one hand against a grey trunk, and screwed up his eyes against the shimmering water. Out there, perhaps a mile away, the white surf flinked on a coral reef, and beyond that, the open sea was dark blue. Within the irregular arc of coral, the lagoon was still as a mountain lake, blue of all shades and shadowy green and purple. The beach between the palm terrace and the water was a thin bow stave, endless apparently, for to Ralph's left the perspectives of palm and beach and water drew to a point at infinity, and always, almost invisible, was the heat. Right. So, a couple of minutes then. Where do you think this appears in the novel, and why do you think that? So send me your ideas on the chat message. I'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll have a look at what you said. Just have a quick look at the Q&As. Yeah, Inspector Calls is definitely the most popular one in this this set of texts that your teachers can choose from. Yeah, You're right, it is at the beginning. So, and yet someone said after they crashed on the island, yet the beginning is it describes what is around them. Someone said at the beginning of the novella, I think. So, just to quickly talk you through the difference of what a novella is and what a novel is. They're slightly different. So, let me just grab a couple of texts that you're likely to potentially be studying. So, I've picked out two which are on the same list as Lord of the Flies. So, we've got Animal Farm and Pigeon English. So these are two that you potentially might be studying in place of Lord of the Flies. So Animal Farm is a novella. As you can see, it is really, really thin. It's about 100 pages, something along those lines. So yeah, it's about a centimetre thick in terms of the amount of pages in there. So this is what we call a novella because it's smaller. So a relatively short piece. Now, Pigeon English, you can see, is a lot thicker than Animal Farm. So Pigeon English would be a novel because it's relatively long, it's relatively bulky. Anything that's quite small would be a novella. So we could also say that Jekyll and Hyde is also a novella. Christmas Carol is also a novella. And generally the novellas on the list are something which you're more likely to study because there's less for you to look at. So teachers tend to prefer them. Okay. Yeah, so you're all absolutely right in terms of this appearing at the start of the novel because it is describing the surroundings. Now, the other thing that you would be told is that Ralph is one of the main characters, so Ralph is mentioned briefly. So, all we need to basically know about Ralph at this point is that he is one of the boys that has landed. We don't need to know anything else for the purposes of this. Okay, so let's move on to doing some feature spotting then. So I've split this into two chunks so it makes it slightly easier for us to manage. So let's have a look. So the shore was fledged with palm trees. Now, can anyone tell me what fledged means? Yeah. So fledged is effectively covering something in a way which you might expect a bird's wing to look like. Yeah, so we could therefore say that this is an example of personification. So remember, when it comes to personification, we need to be looking for a verb because it's an attribute or action that a person or a living thing can do. These stood or leaned or reclined against the light. So our next question is palm trees. Can they stand? Can they lean? Can they recline? They can probably lean, we could say that, but in terms of recline and stood, we're linking back up to personification again. And they're green feathers, so this would be referring to the palm tree leaves itself. They're not literally feathers, so we can therefore say that that is a metaphor. And they were 100 feet up in the air. So this is one that doesn't come up on Proud Smile. So 100 feet in the air sounds an incredible and probably very unlikely height for palm trees to grow to. So we could therefore say that this is a hyperbole. The ground beneath them was a bank covered with coarse grass, torn everywhere by the upheavals of fallen trees. Again, torn, we could potentially say that this is personification. Scattered with decaying coconuts and palm saplings. Behind this was the darkness of the forest proper and the open space of the scar. Now, can anyone tell me what the scar is referring to if you've read Lord of the Flies? Space of the scar. We could also potentially say that this is sibilance, but it's quite weak in terms of commenting on it. It's probably something we wouldn't bother talking about because it's not very exciting. Is hyperbole and exaggeration the same thing? Yes, absolutely. About bank covered with coarse grass as a metaphor. See, I think you could have a bank which is actually covered with grass, so I don't see that that could be a metaphor. We'll come on to what the effect of personification is. Yeah, fabulous. So yeah, it's the landing of the plane. So the scar is a metaphor referring to where the plane has landed. So obviously there isn't actually a scar, not as what we would imagine or intend it to be. Right, so I've picked out a few examples then. So, and I think we go over on to the next page. Yes, we do. Okay, so personification then, the short was fledged with palm trees. So what does that make you think of? What is going on in your head in terms of imagery and imagination? Yeah, absolutely. So this idea that there's a jungle, brilliant, exotic, lovely, yeah. An island densely packed with greenery, lush habitation. Yeah, these are all lovely ideas, guys. I'm very impressed. Well done. Right, so this gives a sense of exoticness. Sort of, I would say, disarray as well. And potentially, I think we could talk about stuff in terms of jungle, scenery being relatively cluttered. I think we could definitely talk about that. Right, so tranquility, yeah, animalistic imagery, that is lovely. And I'm assuming you've read Lord of the Flies to come up with animalistic imagery. Right, okay, let's look at the second personification then. So this is referring to the palm trees. They stood or leaned or reclined. The main thing here to take away, I think, is the rhetorical, not the rhetorical questions, the connotations of stood, leaned and reclined. So first off, we can all say that they're verbs. What else can we say about these? Yeah, it's relaxed, it's a chill atmosphere, I suppose. Easy living, potentially. Lovely. Right, metaphor, green feathers. So first off, I would say that generally feathers, the green is obviously relating to colour, which we could relate to lushness, a variety of the things that you guys have already come up with. In terms of feathers, what do we generally relate feathers to? What is the connotations of feathers? Exactly, birds, yeah. So that could therefore link to nature in terms of not just plants, extending it to animals and everybody that lives there. It could also, in terms of feathers, they can be quite ornate. They're not something that is dangerous to us. They're usually something that, you know, young children collect. If you look at a peacock feather, they're absolutely beautiful. So yeah, I think it's quite a nice warm feeling when you hear of feathers lying on the ground. Right, hyperbole, 100 feet up in the air. So this is what we can relate to the boys themselves. Why might boys say that something is bigger? So for example, when I came to the area that I live in now, when I was at primary school, I thought that buildings were absolutely massive. Now that I live here, they don't seem as big to me anymore. So why might that be? Yeah, exactly. So, or it's a new atmosphere, and generally they're smaller. So the reason why I see things as not being as big anymore is because I've grown. Not a lot, I'm very short, but the idea that they are small. Also overwhelmed. And I really like the person who came up with in awe. That was lovely. Okay, and then metaphor. So open space of a scar. So we've also said we could talk about sibilants, but it's not particularly exciting. What do we think of when we think of a scar? Positive, negative? Yeah, linking to a wound, permanent damage. So in terms of atmosphere, then what might that set up for Ralph and the semantic field of pain? I love that. Broken heart, foreshadowing. Yeah. So this is a really nice meaty one to get into. Fabulous. Right. So let's have a look at the other half. Then we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to pick two, and then we're going to have a go at writing an example. So, sorry, bear with me, my mouth gets really dry. So, Ralph stood one hand against a grey trunk and screwed up his eyes against the shimmering water. So there isn't anything particularly interesting to say in terms of language devices there. We could potentially talk about shimmering in terms of imagery. I think that gives us a really nice idea of how the water is reflecting, the tropical nature, the exoticness. Out there, perhaps a mile away, the white surf flinked. Now, does anybody know what flinked means? I'll be impressed if you do. Yeah, so reflected. Yeah, so flinked is a word made up by Golding. It's a verb. We can tell that by the ed ending. So you will be told this. So when it comes to reading your insert, you'll often find that words or ideas which are likely for you not to have experienced before will have a little number next to them. And then at the bottom, there will be a bigger number, and then there will be the definition next to it. So you'll be told that Flink is created by Golding. So now, can the white surf Flink reflect? Possibly. So we could potentially say that it's personification. It depends how you want to interpret it. So flinked on a coral reef, and beyond that the open sea was dark blue. Again, nothing particularly interesting, but we're building on that imagery. Within the irregular arc of coral, the lagoon was still as a mountain lake. So we've got simile here, still as a mountain lake, blue of all shades and shadowy, green and purple. So we've got sibilants, shades and shadowy. The beach between the palm terrace and the water was a thin biostave, endless apparently. So again, we've got another hyperbole here, because in reality we know that that is not endless, but it probably seems to be for Ralph. For to Ralph's left, the perspectives of palms. So we've got some really nice alliteration here. Perspectives of palms, repetition of the purse sound, and beach and water drew to a point at infinity. So again, we've got a hyperbole here. And always, almost invisible, was the heat. So again, that's relating back to the exotic nature, which you can link into the imagery. Fabulous. Right, okay. So personification then, the white surf flinked. So what could you say about that? We could say it's reflective of the atmosphere. We've got a calm, tranquil nature. let's have a look at what you guys are coming up with. Playful nature, yeah, I like that one. Curiosity. White equaling pure, that's lovely. So why do you think white would equal purity? Why do you think that would link to this text? Holiness foreshadowing Simon, yeah, innocence of the boys. Yeah, so the problem with this is that although you know the background of this text is fantastic, you can create inferences that aren't actually there for you to see in this specific extract. So you're right in terms of it perhaps showing the holiness of Simon, but however, in your brief, in your context, you're not told anything about Simon. So we need to ignore everything else that we know about Lord of the Flies, which isn't in this paragraph. Otherwise, we're creating inferences, and then we're going on to English literature papers rather than English language. We need to keep it potted and contained. Okay, similarly, still as a mountain lake. So I think in terms of still, we could also say that that's personification. Now, as a mountain lake, how is that different to the sea? What might that infer? Yeah, sense of calm, connotations of beauty in the mountains. Yeah, lovely. I would also say there's a sense of stillness in terms of wind and breeze. There is none, so it's very stagnant. Fabulous. Right. Hyperbole then. Endless apparently, and drew to a point of infinity. What can we say about that one? Boys are trapped, yeah. Endless, hopeless, I like that. We could also say a sense of loss. Yeah, the situation is still sinking in. I really like that. I think we can make a argument for sort of being disconnected, both from the situation and the world. Fab. Right, so when it comes to actually writing response for paper 2, you do not need to write all of these by a long chalk. You need to be picking around 2 to talk about. So you need 2 really chunky paragraphs or 3 smaller ones. So we need to pick the 2 that are the most interesting, that we can talk about the most, and perhaps pick out a word or phrase from the bigger quotation to talk about and analyse in further detail. So I'm going to sort of generally eliminate the ones that I don't think are particularly interesting, or the ones which don't have a lot of mileage in terms of actually writing about them. So I'm going to eliminate the simile. I think I'm probably going to want to talk about this hyperbole, because we can talk about both of those together, and we've come up with some really nice ideas in terms of what we could write for analysis. I think I'm likely to probably say let's not bother with the white surf flinked, because it's relatively short and not particularly interesting. So green feathers, although I think is really nice, is a really short phrase, so let's get rid of that one. And then I think you could quite easily talk about the fledging of the palm trees and them standing together, so we could potentially link these 2. And then hyperbole and metaphor, I think these are both nice, but I think I could pull out more in those two uses of personification. Right, okay, let's just quickly look at the chat. Okay, right, so no burning questions so far. Right, so I've picked my two. So let's have a go at actually writing this up. Whoops. Okay. So usually when it comes to writing these, I usually start off with in this extract, just because it's nice and easy and gets us straight into it. Then I'm going to use the author's name to show that I've read and understood the context box, rather than just saying the writer or the author. There's nothing wrong with you saying that. You can absolutely say that and it's not wrong. You won't lose marks. But it's just showing off to the examiner that I really know what I'm talking about. So Golding, then I'm going to talk about the imagery. Creates strong imagery by using personification to describe the shape of the trees. So I've already got imagery in there and I've got personification in there. So this is effectively my point. So a lot of you will have been taught P paragraphs, peel, comment evidence analysis, petals, Peter. There's absolutely loads of them out there, and they're all very similar. So what I suggest in terms of using those, which I will talk more about in terms of exam technique later on in the week, is use them but don't feel limited by them. So this is effectively my point and this is absolutely fine. And then I'm going to put a comma and then I'm going to embed my quotation. So when you embed your quotation, you always need a comma before. So these stood or leaned, spell stood correctly, or leaned or reclined. Now the punctuation needs to come before you close the speech marks and then put your speech marks. So now I'm going to put my analysis. So this suggests that the scene is both picturesque, so I'm starting a basic level analysis here, and relaxed. So nothing too showy, nothing particularly exciting, basic level stuff here. I'm then going to take this on higher by talking about the verbs themselves. So the verb, comma, open speech mark, reclined, suggests. So I'm now going to speak about this in a clearer level where I'm showing deeper analysis. I've also labelled the word class. So the verb, I don't need a comma there. The verb reclined suggests. So I don't need a comma there because I haven't got a big quotation coming in. I've just got the one word and I haven't got a big sentence before it like I have in my first sentence. So the verb reclined suggests. So what does this suggest to us? That the trees are sloping almost to the point of lying down. This, now what could we say? What could we take this further in saying, so they're almost lying down, what does this suggest to the reader? So this makes the reader, now we can either say think, feel, so it's always good to give a personal response. Now when it comes to personal responses, I think it's good if you remove yourself and say the reader, so you're being more objective. However, I've had lots of students who say, well, I don't feel anything when I read this. And that's fine. If it's not something that's for you and you're not particularly excited by the text, that's fine. But you need to come up with an idea where you are able to empathise with how a reader might be affected. So effectively, if it doesn't bother you in any sense, but you think, oh, well, perhaps someone might think like this, then just say this makes the reader think or feel. Yeah, calm, laziness. So picturesque means sort of beautiful, sort of basically look like you're looking at a beautiful watercolour, a beautiful painting of scenery. So this makes the reader feel that the atmosphere is pleasant, which creates a sense of laziness as the scene is, what can we say? Which creates a sense of laziness as the scene is not interrupted. Fabulous. Right. So I'm now going to go on to talk about my hyperboles. I'm going to return to this in a moment in terms of sentence forms. So let's get on with the language features and techniques for now. So the use of hyperbole suggests that the island's beauty is incomprehensible. So again, I'm making another point and I'm using advanced vocabulary to show off to the examiner that I really know my stuff and that I'm able to use high-level English. So then I'm going to put in the water was, and then I'm going to put ... because I don't want to put absolutely everything in there. So I'm going to remove some unnecessary information. Was endless, apparently. So this suggests, now I'm going to move on to Ralph. So this suggests that Ralph is overwhelmed by the enormity of the land. This could be because he is in shock, or because he is a young boy. So I'm giving possible alternative interpretations there. Right, the use of the adverb. So I'm now taking a step further. Apparently. So this is my deeper analysis. I'm labelling the use of the adverb suggests that Ralph is flippant. So flippant means sort of, oh, I don't really care about his observations, and is happy to be overcome by nature. So it's pretty relaxed, which reflects the nature of the trees. We could talk about that and we could link those two together. Right, so quickly, just before we finish off the teaching then. So what can we say about sentence forms? So we've got simple, compound or complex. Now there isn't anything particularly interesting in terms of there's a big difference. So we've got simple sentence here, but generally they're complex sentences. Now what I think is interesting and why I've said I'm going to return is the use of what was it, stood or leaned or reclined, which is quite an odd phrase. Usually we would say stood, comma, leaned or reclined. So I'm going to put here the repeated. So I'm now linking these two together and bundling everything together rather than starting a whole new paragraph and saying this quotation all over again. So the repeated use of the conjunction, so I'm labelling again, or suggests that the writer, so I'm saying suggest, I'm not saying says, that the writer says this, so I'm being tentative, that the writer is trying to evoke a casual tone, which in turn represents the serenity of the island. So I'm linking everything together and saying how that links to the mood how it links to the scenery and why it's relevant. So if you can't find something in terms of, you know, we're talking about the scenery here, if you're just saying for the sake of it, oh, a simple sentence is used, if there isn't a reason for why it's there, or if it's actually links to the scenery, then don't bother writing about it because you won't get marks. It needs to link to the scenery because that's what the question is. Right, okay, so shall we move on to questions then for the last 15 minutes?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. There's a question that's been asked, which is, won't you lose marks due to the repetition of suggests?
Yes, good question. And the answer to that is, you're not wrong. I don't think you wouldn't lose marks. So how AQA works is that they don't take marks away. It's a positive mark scheme. It would limit you getting higher. So you're absolutely right. So in terms of how could we improve this, you're absolutely right. How many times have we must and suggests? So 3 times maybe. So we could say this suggests or implies or this postulates. So you're absolutely right in terms of it wouldn't lose you marks, but it would limit, which is slightly different. But it wouldn't limit you in a huge way. It might make a difference in you getting a lower mark in that level. So for example, level 3, which would be 5 to 6 marks, getting a 5 instead of a 6. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So that would be how we could improve this one. Okay.
Cool. Another question on the Q&A was, will we be able to learn about an in spectacles, seeming as that's what most of us are studying at school?
Right. So really, I think that's sort of down to in terms of how we plan and structure the following lessons. So I've chosen this particular text as an example of a extract that you could talk about. So in terms of the papers in the paper 1 is that you wouldn't be able to use an in spectacles because it is not what you would be given in your paper 1s or your paper 2s for your English language, because you're not covering plays. This is just descriptive writing. So although we have looked at Lord of the Flies, which is on the syllabus for English literature, we've not been looking at it from a literature perspective. We've been looking at it from a language perspective. And this is probably something that you wouldn't get in the exam for literature. It's not something that you would look at. You would be looking more at characters, themes, plot. Really, in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't have anything to do with usually what you will be writing about for Lord of the Flies. This is just an example for language. So tomorrow I've got A Christmas Carol. Again, it is prose. You will be given prose in the exam, which means that we can't talk about plays. And the way we will be looking at A Christmas Carol will be very similar in that you probably will not use what we are doing tomorrow in your literature exam, because we are doing it with a language focus and we are given an extract, and you won't be given an extract of a paragraph to say describe the feelings or the surroundings. It's not something you're given. You're usually focused on character or plot, if that makes sense. Does that answer that question, Frederica?
Yes, I think it does. Another question that came in was, can you go back to the slide with all the language devices, please?
Yep.
And then while you're doing that, we had another question that asked, do you have to use word classification, for example, verbs?
Right. You don't have to, but it will improve your marks. This question is all about throwing terminology out. Successful candidates who get the high marks, the top bands, use word classes when they zoom in on words, when they talk about a specific word, because it's more interesting to the examiner. Instead of saying the word happy suggests, it's not really giving any extra information. If you say the adjective happy, you're showing that you've got a really clear understanding of what you're looking at. So no, you don't have to use them. If you don't know, don't guess. However, I would say that you probably won't get more than 5 marks if you don't do that, because it's unless your analysis is very, very good, maybe 6 marks. I don't think you get into the level 4 if you didn't do that.
Okay, great. While we're waiting for some other questions to come through, shall we just carry on where we left off?
Yeah.
And just to say, guys, you've just got about 8 minutes. So if you do have any more questions, please send them through.
Right, I'll just go through a couple of these. So what is edit? So edit just means when you come to your question 5s, proofread and make sure everything makes sense. Will it matter if we haven't read Lord of the Flies, but they give it as an exam analysis question? Right, so just to be clear, what I've done with these, so I've picked out Lord of the Flies and I've picked out A Christmas Carol. Anita and Me is going up as some written content. I think that's all for what is on the GCSE syllabus. I'm potentially thinking about To Kill a Mockingbird as well. That's on OCR or EdXL, one of the other ones. So you won't be given any texts that are on the English literature papers, because it would give some people an unfair advantage. So don't worry about Lord of the Flies coming up on your language paper, it won't. But for the purposes of this, we're just looking at it in very general terms, so don't worry about that. And that won't be any, there won't be any questions on set text, so don't worry about it. Right, how many marks is this question worth? 8. So you get a 4, an 8, an 8, a 16 and a 40. So in the grand scheme of things, this is a relatively low proportion of marks across the entire paper. Will we be studying Pride and Prejudice? Right, so with all of these are just, as I've said, examples which you won't, which are very general. You don't need to worry about the background of it. So this is a language, not a literature lesson. They would be very, very different. We'd be looking at plot, themes, characters, all of that sort of stuff. This is specifically about a block of text, so don't worry about that. In terms of will we be looking at Pride and Prejudice, I don't know. I haven't got that far in planning the absolutely everything. Probably not though. Right, so in terms of sentence forms that we could look at, so generally they're not very interesting in terms of how we can relate it back. So that's why I've only covered that one thing. So for example, the shore was fledged with palm trees. Yes, it is a simple sentence because it only has the one verb going on there, but does it really add anything in terms of it showing scenery? I suppose it's quite straightforward. It gives you a nice clear introduction, but really, can you write a lot about it? Probably not. And then we've just got a lot of complex sentences. So I suppose you could say the complex sentences, they're almost list-like. So you could perhaps talk about why are they list-like? Well, because we're setting up a description of the scene, we're making a very clear set of images in the reader's mind. Therefore, we're giving lots and lots of information on the bats almost. So we could potentially talk about that. We could talk about the idea that we've got this dash here, which is just giving us extra information, and why use a dash potentially, but that is really complicated stuff, and I don't think it would really link that much into actually how this describes the scenery, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. And then again, we've got another really long complex sentence at the end there. Right, so anything else? Yeah, in terms of creating writing, we will be getting to that, so don't worry about that. How many paragraphs would you write for this type of question? 2 to 3. In terms of revision techniques for English and using it effectively, so revision techniques, I would say, are things like proud smile, which just gets all the terminology into your head. I'm creating, along with some other people, some written content. So there are going to be lots of example questions for you to have a go at. So there are some which are full answers, some which are just bullet point answers of things you could potentially comment on, and those will be coming out over the course of the week on this paper. So there's absolutely loads you could do in terms of having a go at questions there. And I'm also doing short videos as well, with some of the texts that I haven't covered in this lesson, but are on there for you to have a go at written content and just having a go at a paragraph of writing. So there's loads of revision tools in terms of that on our online school, so that might be a good place for you to look. There's also a variety of sort of textbooks that you could have a go at and workbooks sort of out there on the market.
Hi Vicki, I've just had 2 questions come in. One of them is, when will the lesson on Christmas Carol be? And I think that will be tomorrow, won't it?
Yeah.
And the second one was, how long would you advise to spend on a question like this? Is there any time for planning?
Yeah, good question. So this is only worth 8 marks. So I would say 10 to 15 minutes. In terms of planning, I wouldn't actually sort of bullet point my answers down because it's such a short, I'll put those language devices back up for you again. Because it's such a short answer, I won't worry about spending lots of time planning it because you don't have the time to. So I would spend time actually analysing, pulling the extract apart, highlighting, underlining, and just sort of, as I've done, sort of just draw an arrow and say personification or something like that. That's all I would do, and I would spend my time, so I spend maybe 2 to 3 minutes reading and annotating it. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it at all because it's only an 8 marker. I'm not sure we've got anything else, Frederica. Do you think there's anything else we need to answer?
I'm just having a quick look to see if there's anything that we haven't. I think we have, for the people that joined kind of halfway through and didn't quite catch what I said at the beginning, Vicki has already kind of said that everything will be recorded, so these sessions are recorded, but she also mentioned that we have some shorter recorded videos that kind of will help with your revision as you go along, and all of that stuff is on the online school where there's links that you can find the videos to. So if there's anything you want to practice from today's lesson, then over the course of the week you'll be able to find those videos. So don't worry if you didn't quite catch things or you feel like you need to go over it again. You'll definitely be able to have a chance to do that.
Can I also add, Frederica, that we're looking at 3 different texts this week on language paper 1, question 2. So we'll be doing the same sort of thing every day, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and we'll just be going over and practicing with a load of different texts. So you're getting a load of different sort of ideas. So this one was from 1958. So tomorrow we're looking at Christmas Carol, which was 1849, somewhere around there, 48. And I'm going to be looking at The Lovely Bones as well, which I think was 2002. So you're getting a nice range of different time periods. So you'll get a lot of different stuff to go over, and then you'll get all that written content as well, which has a nice variety of ages and different things you could talk about. So there will be a nice variety of stuff that we will go over in lesson and that you can go over outside of the lessons as well.
Great, thank you, Vicky. And thanks everyone. It's now 12 o'clock, so we're going to call it a day for English. But just to say that we have a math session at 12:15. So tune in for that, and see you guys tomorrow again for English. Thanks, bye.
Bye.